Hey, Genesis family, it is day 39 of our Lenten journey through the Gospel of Matthew, and we are in chapter 23. If you haven't already read that, I invite you to press pause now, read it, and then come back. One of my favorite cartoons growing up as a kid was The Fat Albert Show. It had a colorful cast of characters like Dumb Donald and Bucky and Russell and Weird Harold, and of course Fat Albert. He was the conscience of his gang and always led the charge in fixing the problems that they uncovered. All of this was the invention of Bill Cosby, who used these characters as part of his stand-up comedy routine and then brought them to life in animation. This springboarded Cosby into a hugely successful career, where he starred in 2 iterations of The Cosby Show, where his mixture of comedy and wisdom endeared him to our culture. He became known as America's Dad. He even starred in pudding pop commercials, and kids say the darndest things. Life was great for Bill Cosby, until it wasn't. All of a sudden, those who knew him privately began to expose what he really was. And the perception that we had as a culture completely changed. Cosby was indeed one of the rudest of celebrities and very manipulative, sexually assaulting women over and over again. This, of course, landed him in prison and stained his legacy. Try to find The Cosby Show on reruns. Nobody wants a part of that. And that's because the reality of his character was so contrary to the character he played. He was a good actor, both on film and in person. That's kind of what Jesus is getting at in our reading today. Multiple times he calls out hypocrisy among the religious leaders. Now, a hypocrite is a play actor, and Jesus uses that to reference how the religious leaders were living. They weren't being real. They were acting the part. They were doing things for show. They would wear their religious garb in a way that called attention to themselves. They loved the honor at banquets, and they loved the best seats in the synagogue, and they liked people calling them teacher and rabbi. And Jesus is using that as an example to call his disciples away, completely away, far away from that kind of living, where instead of putting on masks, we're real. 7 times Jesus pronounces woes on the religious leaders, multiple times calling them hypocrites and blind guides. He challenges them about whether or not they are really authentic, whether they're real or not. He talks about how they clean the outside of the cup, but the inside is left dirty. He talks about how they were whitewashing their lives, where they were appearing as something that they were not. He challenges them about the ways in which they were taking oaths and whether or not they were truly honoring the places that God had designated as his and belonging to him. This was a severe challenge, and Jesus is sharing that challenge not directly to these religious leaders, but to the crowds and the disciples. When we read the Bible, we always need to note the audience of the one who is speaking. And here, Jesus is not talking directly to the religious leaders. He's done that already. He's talking to the crowds and the disciples. And that's because, friends, there's a part of that Pharisaical spirit that tries to reside in each of us. You see, we live in a culture that is really for show. We put the best face forward. We want people to think well of us. And so oftentimes there are things going on the inside of us that we do not want exposed on the outside. And sometimes that's really appropriate. But the big issue for us is, are we allowing God to do his work on the inside of us? Are we taking that time and allowing God to come in and cleanse us? Or is our life characterized by that outward demonstration where we put on a show? You know, the people who have a bunch of bumper stickers or who wear their Christian t-shirts all the time. There's nothing wrong with that, but the question is, do we really have a transformed life that is showing on the inside out? Or are we ignoring the issues on the inside and simply trying to appear as something that we're not. Jesus lists all these woes, and then notice what he says near the end of our reading. He mourns over the city of Jerusalem because they had been sent prophets, but they had mistreated them. They had stoned them and killed them. And here's what Jesus says: "How I have longed to gather you as a hen gathers her chicks, but you were not willing." Notice what Jesus is saying. Not only was he reaching out to each of them individually, but he was trying to collect them together into a community, into a family, and that family would be an authentically real family, transformed by the kingdom of heaven. That's what Jesus wanted. He warned the crowds and his disciples to honor the religious leaders because of their position, but don't try to replicate their life. Jesus is looking in his kingdom for lives that can be multiplied in a good way. That we would not be actors or people who put on a show, but we would be real. That people would know us, the good, the bad, and even the ugly, because the kingdom of heaven is founded upon the grace of God. Not the appearance, not the affirmation, not something that is always pure, but something that is being purified by God himself. That's the kingdom of heaven. And that's what Jesus is challenging his disciples on, and that's what he challenges us for in this holy season of Lent. Notice with me, he says things like, you tithe on all of the stuff that you have, your mint and your spices, but you have ignored the weightier matters like justice and mercy and faithfulness. I would have you do the latter while still doing the former. Jesus was not against what these Pharisees advocated for in the sense of justice and righteousness. The problem was they just weren't doing it. They were not necessarily wrong in their views of doctrine or theology. The problem was they were being shaped more by their own passions and interests and desires. Inside, you're full of greed and self-indulgence, he says. That's not how I want it to be. I want what is happening on the inside to be reflected on the outside. There's no disparity. In the kingdom of heaven, God is looking for alignment, that what is happening on the inside is aligned with what is happening on the outside. And that's where we need God's grace. Jesus offers us that grace in the kingdom that he has come to bring. And part of that grace is warning against our human tendencies to act the part. And so in this Lenten season, friends, let us let God cleanse us. Remember, Jesus overturned the tables in the temple, and that's what kicked this whole thing off. Jesus has come now. His miracles have been fewer, and his words are becoming more intense as he moves on toward the cross. And that's because his time on earth is limited, and he is trying to download the most important qualities of the kingdom of heaven that he wants to replicate in the lives of his disciples. And so, Jesus will overturn the tables in our own temples, challenging us about what's happening on the inside so that we can avoid the trap of acting the part and instead allowing him to gather us together as a hen gathers her chicks. Would you pray with me? Holy God, we give you thanks that you indeed want us to be authentic and real. That what is happening on the inside, Lord, let it happen truly on the outside. And let what happens on the inside be good and right, because you are doing the work. Help us, Lord, to avoid the trap of hypocrisy. Help us not to be blind guides who act the part. Help us to be your people who can replicate your grace. In Jesus' name, amen.